Hey everybody, welcome back to another Flash recap and review. Today we're talking about the penultimate episode of The Flash Season 6. Yeah, I know, it's really quick. But this is the second to last episode of the season. Season 6, Episode 18, entitled Pay the Piper. If you haven't watched the episode, pause this video, go watch it on cwtv.com, and then come back here because I am talking spoilers. This was a fairly eventful episode in terms of character development, and there's some crazy action stuff that happened. There was also a lot of pep talks in this episode, which I noticed. Some interesting storytelling elements, though, that I thought were done really well. Like, I did really enjoy this episode. I would put it on par with last week. Like, looking back at last week, I was kind of harsh on it. I did actually enjoy ultimately, and besides those things that I pointed out, overall it was a good episode, and I think this one was actually on par with that one. This one, I think, did a really great job of building up the emotional stakes of what's happening, which they've been doing throughout the season, but I think this episode in particular really did a great job of setting up what's at stake for this last part of the season, last episode pretty much, because the finale is next week. But you really do get to see the emotional toll all this is taking on the characters, and I think they did that really well. So let's get into the nitty and gritty stuff that happened in this episode. First, we start off with Barry visiting Joe at Witness Protection to tell him everything about the mirror clones and Iris. This I was not expecting. I didn't think we would see Joe again this season, but it was nice seeing him again. They had this really great conversation, and Barry is obviously taking it hard that he couldn't tell that the wife he was with this whole time was a fake. Joe talked about how he was fooled too, and that Wally warned him and he just didn't do anything about it. So you see that they're both kind of blaming themselves for what happened here, which I think was a good scene to have. Again, nice seeing Joe, but it's also good to see that he's acknowledging that, yeah, I could have done something too. So I thought that was good that they kind of cleared that up. Now we go to Team Flash as they're catching up on everything. Barry tells them about the mirror clones, and we have this really big argument between Cisco and Barry. From Cisco's perspective, he's wondering, well, what if they're all dead? What if everybody that was turned into a mirror clone or used to create a mirror clone was then killed afterwards? Like, how do we know they're even still alive? And of course, Barry, being more optimistic, is like, no, we have to fight. They're still out there. We have to try. They get into this big argument. Cecile breaks it up, tells everybody to get together. Everybody splits off to do their own missions. You see Allegra is still mad at Nash. Hopefully that gets resolved by next week, but I also wouldn't be surprised since this episode is technically getting cut short. Then we have Allegra and Barry in the Speed Lab talking about everything in the mirror clones. They're then attacked by a new Godspeed. This new Godspeed has an interesting ability where he can use sound waves to basically steal speed from people, and he tries to take it from Barry, threatens him, and says that he wants Barry to give up his speed. Nash Wells comes in to save Barry and Allegra, and Godspeed gets away. After that, Team Flash regroups, and they decide that in order to stop Godspeed, they're going to need help. And they decide that help will be Hartley Rathaway, aka Pied Piper. When we were introduced to Earth Prime during Crisis on Infinite Earths, we saw that Hartley and Flash are not friends anymore because around season 2, I think it was, when Barry went back in time, he changed the timeline, and then he and Hartley and Team Flash, they were all good. But because of Crisis, it went back to them being enemies. During Crisis, they had hinted that something had happened specifically between Hartley and the Flash for him to hate him really. Like, you could tell there's some beef there, but they didn't really explain why. And in this episode, we finally figure out why Hartley has beef with the Flash. It turns out during the bridge scene way back in season 1, Barry and Pied Piper were actually not alone. Pied Piper had a squad of people with him. They used a weapon to try and stop Barry, but Barry flung a lightning bolt back at them. The lightning and the wave from the weapon collided and caused this big explosion of energy, and that caused one of Hartley's right-hand men to have this destabilization in his body. So basically he's like kind of spazzing out and he can't really control his form anymore. Hartley tries to save him, but it doesn't work. And so now Hartley blames the Flash for his right-hand man being down for the count. So Barry decides to try and confront Hartley and ask for his help. Of course, Hartley is not having it because he's not happy with the Flash, obviously, but they do convince him to help. Nash appears to him, and of course, Hartley's confused like Harrison Wells, and they explain that it's Nash. They do make this joke about Crisis, and they try to explain it, but then they just gloss over it because, of course, it's a lot to explain to somebody who doesn't know, so they just kind of gloss over it, which is kind of funny. Hartley agrees to help Team Flash with Godspeed in exchange for them helping Roderick, who is Hartley's right-hand man, which you find out later there's more to it, and I kind of saw it coming, but we'll get there. We see Cisco and Hartley reunite, and of course they're being really snarky towards each other, roasting each other. And then Cisco says something which I think is one of the first clues as to the true nature of Hartley and Roderick's relationship. He says, I'm trying to save someone I love. You wouldn't understand. You only love yourself. Something like that. And you can see Hartley make a face. And at this moment, I'm like, okay, I definitely think there's something more going on here, because why would Hartley be so hurt by this one guy being down for the count when it's just a henchman, right? The second hint to Roderick and Hartley's relationship was when they first tried to save Roderick using helium and Allegra's light powers. It doesn't work, and you can see Hartley's really pissed off by that. And he's like, you guys ruined my world, something along the lines of that. And that's when you're really starting to see, okay, yeah, there's something more going on here. After that, Godspeed appears again to threaten Barry and says he has 1 hour to give up his speed or else. After that, Barry goes to the speed lab to continue working on the artificial speed force, and Nash confronts him, kind of pushes him around like, what are you doing? What are you doing? You know, Iris and Joe aren't here to help you anymore. You can't talk to them. You have to talk to me. Ultimately, Nash is trying to get Barry to realize that even though he's made a mistake with the whole Mirror Iris thing, that he still has to do something, that he has a chance to fix it, unlike Nash, who kind of talks about what happened to his partner and then everything with Crisis and becoming Pariah, how he feels like he has nothing he can do to really redeem himself for that, but Barry has a chance here to stop Godspeed and to ultimately save Iris and stop Eva, right? Which I thought was a really sweet moment, and I think that worked for their characters. And I think this is a theme that you're seeing throughout the episode, where different characters you can see are kind of having trouble with forgiving themselves for things that have happened up to this point, dealing with their value, questioning their value, their self-worth, and someone comes along to help them realize that they still have value, that they still have a chance to fix things, that they need to forgive themselves. And I think that's a theme that we see throughout this episode, which I think was done really well. Speaking of pep talks, Cisco gets one from Cecile. We see that Cisco's kind of having some self-doubt, where he's talking about how when he was Vibe, he had powers and he was so valuable and he was so cool and he knew what to do, blah, blah, blah. And he kind of feels like without Vibe, he's almost feeling kind of useless. Cecile kind of helps him get out of this mindset, reminding him that he was a lot before Vibe. He had the smarts and stuff, and that's why Camilla fell in love with him. So she kind of talks him out of it and gives him a pep talk. And then after that, we also see Hartley and Barry having a heart-to-heart, and this is where they officially reveal that Hartley and Roderick are dating, and that's why he's so mad about what happened. You can see Hartley is also blaming himself for what happened on the bridge, that because he had Roderick in the crosshairs, that he had Roderick up there fighting with the weapon, that it's his fault that Roderick is the way he is now. But Barry kind of talks him out of it, and again, the theme of forgiveness, he's like, we have to forgive ourselves in order to save the people we love, something along the lines of that. I thought that was a really sweet moment. And then Hartley's like, thanks, Oprah. I think Hartley was actually really funny in this episode. He had a lot of snarky jabs at everybody on Team Flash. I thought that was really good. After that, we see Godspeed going to Iron Heights and stealing the speed from all the previous Godspeeds. So it's getting real serious at this point. I thought that was really cool. I thought that was a really good twist to it, and it added a lot more stakes to this episode, because you can see this guy is getting more and more speed. But at this point, we don't know who it is yet. So even though Barry's losing his speed, he still has to go out there and fight Godspeed with what speed he has left. Cisco tries to talk him out of it, but he's like, no, Godspeed's my problem, I have to do this. So of course he goes to fight Godspeed and is getting whooped because he doesn't have as much speed, and Godspeed at this point is a lot faster than him. He's getting beat up, and then Godspeed tries to take his speed. He says something really interesting, which they do point out later, where he says, you don't deserve your speed, we do. Emphasis on we. So we're gonna have to figure out what that we is. I kind of talked about that way back in my first recap and review, if you've been watching that long, where I was talking about who is the group sending these Godspeeds. And I think that's something they're gonna explore in this next episode, in the finale, but also going into the next season. So we'll have to see. Harley comes along to help Barry. Barry's like falling off of a roof because he tries to run up a building but runs out of speed. They decide to cross streams, as Nash and Cisco said, where they combine Barry's electricity, his lightning, with Hartley's vibrational waves from his gauntlets, and that destabilizes Godspeed the same way that Roderick was destabilized. So I thought that was a good way of kind of tying it together, bringing it full circle. Once Godspeed is down, you see that he's oozing blue blood, and Nash and Cisco determine that that is charged sound, which I feel like was kind of weird, kind of convenient, because this is what they use to save Roderick. Like I said, it's convenient, it's very Deus Ex Machina, but I think it works and it helps kind of tie up the story in a way that's not too abrupt, but it makes sense. So they use the blue blood on Roderick and it works, and he's back. He and Hartley are reunited. Back in the Cortex, Cisco is talking about how he's excited that they're done with Godspeed, but Barry says that he went to go interrogate this Godspeed, and it turns out that is not August Hart, that is not the Godspeed, that's another clone. And we get another interesting quote where Barry says that this Godspeed said, The one who sent me wants infinite velocity. I still don't know who this is, and I'm sure people who read the comics probably know who this person is that they're referring to, who this we is, what this group is. I'm not sure if this is tied into Black Hole because from what I can remember so far, we haven't seen Joseph Carver really reference Godspeed or interact with Godspeed at all. So I think this is actually another group that we have to deal with going into the next season. So that's going to be interesting. Now, as we're wrapping things up, Hartley and Barry make peace finally. Well, as of right now, Barry makes a joke like, I hope you guys take a break from robbing diamonds and stuff. And then Hartley says, no promises. We get this other quote from Hartley, which I think was really good, where he said, you have to do more than forgive yourself. You have to believe the world can change, which I think adds another layer to this whole forgiveness story, that this forgiveness theme that they've been going through this episode. And so I think Barry kind of has this realization as he's walking away too, that like, it's more than just forgiving yourself. It's like having faith that you can make a difference, which I think was a great lesson for this episode for the characters. And I think it's a lesson that ties into everything. So then we end with Barry giving everybody a pep talk, and they decide that they're all going to team up to beat Ava and take her down once and for all. Cisco is going to go to Atlantis to get a component to build an energy source that they'll use to stop her and to get Iris and everybody out of the mirror dimension. The end credit scene is Ava waking up from a chamber saying, I'm coming for you, Joseph. So, of course, she's going to go after her husband, and that's going to be interesting. All right, the second big part of this episode was Iris and Camilla in the mirror world. We see Iris leaving a message for Barry, talking about the side effects that being in the mirror world is having on her. It's called neurodissonance. I think that's what Ava called it. So you see that Iris is kind of scratching like Ava was, and she's having some kind of visions and headaches, which is interesting. You can see that the world is actually taking a toll on her. She's kind of leaving a message for Barry because she doesn't know if she's going to make it out. And in case Barry comes in and she's not there, she wants that to be there for when he finds her, which is kind of sad, but we know she's going to find a way out. I'm sure she will. While she's there, she finds Camilla finally in the cortex, or like the mirror version of the cortex. Camilla doesn't believe it's her because, of course, she was trapped by Mirror Iris, so she has some trust issues right now. She like throws a wrench at her head, which is really funny. Iris has to prove that she is the real Iris, which is a cool moment. Now, the facts that she had used to prove that she was the real Iris, to me, felt like things that anybody on Team Flash pretty much knew until she had mentioned the Chewbacca shirt. So at first I was like, okay, I think anybody could know that. Even Iris, like Mirror Iris, would know that too. So I could see why Camilla was still kind of hesitant. But then when she said the Chewbacca thing, then it made more sense because that's a more specific fact. Also, I like that in these mirror scenes, they use this cool prism effect to kind of help distinguish it from the real world. And it also works as a transition between scenes. I thought that was really cool. One interesting thing about Camilla reuniting with Iris is that she mentions she's never seen Ava McCulloch while trapped in the mirror world, which I thought was really interesting, that maybe Ava just wanted to bring her in but didn't really have any reason to kind of imprison her or to mess with her like she was with Iris. So I thought that was interesting. And I wonder if they're going to have a bigger reason for that. And I'm sure actually Singh is going to have a similar experience because he probably never saw either of them. So we'll see what happens when they all reunite. Also, Camilla's not being affected by neurodissonance yet, I guess because she's actually been in there less time, which makes sense. You see her experimenting on some stuff from the mirror world. We see Cicada's dagger again. Another interesting thing about this mirror thing is that we also see Iris having doubts, which ties into the whole forgiving yourself story that they've been doing throughout this episode. And you see that she's kind of doubting herself as a reporter because she's like, well, I couldn't figure out that Ava was playing me, so am I really that good of a reporter? And of course, Camilla talks her out of it. Another pep talk. But I thought that was a really great scene between them, and you can see that they're going to team up to try and get out of the mirror world. The last story of the episode, which wasn't as big, but I think it was kind of sweet, which was Frost and Ralph. Frost is having doubts about going to see Caitlin's mom because to her, that's not really her mom per se. It's someone that's related to another part of her. Ralph tries to convince her that she shouldn't be nervous, that she shouldn't have any doubts about going to see Caitlin's mom because that's still technically her mom too. And he says that she actually needs a lot more work and that she actually hasn't been doing well with her life coaching because of this, which I think is kind of weird. But then towards the end of the episode, Ralph comes back to apologize to her and talks about how it's normal to be intimidated by parents, that's something that a lot of people deal with. He also talks about his dad and how his experience made him feel similar. So I thought that worked well. And it wraps up with Ralph giving her a diploma instead of a diploma. I thought it was an interesting pun. But basically says that she has graduated from his life coach school, which I guess is cool. Like I said last video, I think these scenes are because Caitlin Panbaker at the time of filming this was pregnant. She has since had her baby. Because of her pregnancy, they probably wanted to film stuff with her still in it, but it had to be very, very minimal. So we get these small scenes in this apartment. I'm sure next season she'll be back to normal and we'll see her doing more stuff to help with the overarching story. Overall, I think this was a really good episode. There's some great character development for everybody in Team Flash. They were able to progress the story forward. It felt like filler at times, but it actually was kind of important to the overall story when you think about it. There's also a great theme about forgiveness and forgiving yourself. Also, I have to give a shout out to the writing. I think that was done really well. There's a lot of show and tell stuff. Like, they do a great job of kind of hinting at Hartley's relationship with Roderick without flat out telling you until closer to the end, which I thought was really good. Godspeed, I thought was handled really well in this episode. I thought he was a really formidable villain, and it makes me really curious and excited to see where his story is going to go and what group, if it's not Black Hole, is going to be behind him. Next episode is the season finale, technically, but we know that that's not the finale they had planned on from the beginning, that there's actually gonna be like 2 or 3 more episodes. Hopefully they wrap up stuff in a way that makes sense, that doesn't leave us hanging too much. I'm sure this is gonna end on some cliffhanger because, again, they couldn't finish filming. They're probably gonna have to continue everything going into the next season, so we will see. What did you think about this episode of Flash? Let me know down in the comments. Also, don't forget to like this video, share it, and subscribe. Thank you for watching. I will see you in the next one.